Hi, this is Cheryl from Naughty's Art, and we're going to be airbrushing today. So, the way we're going to do this video is I'm going to do a little intro right now, talk about my tools, and then most of this is going to go in time-lapse. So, let me reposition the camera. So, this is the paint master for the Lady of Innsmouth for the painted resins. And I have 12 of these to do for Kickstarter backers and one person who ordered one separately. So, most of this is airbrushed. What is hand painted is right in the bodice and the facial details, the lips and eyes. Everything else is done with an airbrush, so that's what we're going to do today. This is going to jump around a lot because I'm doing 12 and I'm pretty much doing them all at once. I'm going to show you on a couple, stop the video, finish the rest, then start shooting again when we start working with a different color. So to talk about what I'm using, all of my airbrush paints are Createx airbrush acrylics. They're really great. They're not super expensive, but they're really nice quality. If you watched my previous video, you saw on the patching and priming, so these have all been primed. White primer up here, black primer down here. I've masked these off so I can do the skin first. That actually takes the most masking because I really don't want to get the skin colors on this part of the bodice, which is going to be really light. This doesn't really matter, but I figured it'd save me time to have it masked off with just some plastic. This is a 0.4 mil plastic drop cloth. I bought a couple of these. This is one I haven't cut up. But I bought a couple of these at Harbor Freight. They're like $2. And they're huge. It's 108 square feet. It's 9 by 12 feet. So it's, great for that. Very few of what I'm going to be painting on is straight out of these bottles though, except for the black and some of the iridescent blue that's going to go on the base. The rest is all custom mixed colors that I did. So I will show you. This is the shell pink, and it did have labels on as to what went into the mix, but I have it written down elsewhere. So the fact that it's rubbing off the wall is not a big problem. This is shell paint that's used on a lot of the face. It's actually the first color we'll be using. And it's a mix of white, little couple drops of red, some peach, some pearl, airbrush colors, and then a little bit of iridescent white, Liquitex, is it Liquitex soft body acrylics, which are not quite as liquidy as airbrush colors, but they're close, and just add a little bit of airbrush thinner to make sure it's the right viscosity. So that's the first color we're using. That's what most of these are. For example, this is the shading color for the skin, which is sort of a maroon. It's a mix of purple and brown. So that's what most of this is. The two exceptions are right here. And I actually need to mix up some more before we get to this stage. It's an iridescent pink glaze, and what it is Liquitex matte medium, some airbrush thinner, and some Pearl-Ex powders. Most of these can go through an airbrush, a few can't, like Sparkle Copper that are really kind of chunky glitter, but most can. This is actually some of this, which is Interference Violet, and then Duochrome Red Blue, and that's, all that's in here is these mica powders and the glaze. And then I have another one that's Duochrome blue-green and a little bit of, I think it was Interference Blue. Or no, it was Interference green in there, not blue. That's that part of it. The paints. I also have this. This is for my single action airbrush to clean it out. It's just Windex. Also Windex in a little bottle. Distilled water that I don't use that often, but I use it some for thinning. And then airbrush cleaner. This actually comes in a big bottle, but I just put some in a little squeeze bottle. There's an airbrush compressor that's down on the floor. I'm not going to show that with the video because I don't want to move the camera again right now. And then there are my airbrushes. This one isn't currently attached to the compressor. This is a Pache Talon double action airbrush, and you can see I added, this is just hot glue to create a taller button, which is just more comfortable for my hands. And you push down for air, pull, can't pull back for color because I have it have the stopper there. Alright. Push down for air, pull back for color. And by doing this, you can control both the amount of air and then the amount of paint flow, which is why double actions are really great for doing detail. But what I'll be doing first is just flat coating. And for flat coats, I use my trusty single actions Pache H series. These are fantastic. This is a great sort of workhorse airbrush. It's good for solid coating. If I use a airbrush lacquer in this instead of the spray that I'd use, and that's actually coming up shortly, I'll tell you what that's for. This will be doing first. In between layers, you're going to see me spraying with the Krylon matte. And I labeled it matte because the only place it's labeled is either on the cap, which I always take off, and I have gloss too, in the same, and the packaging looks exactly the same except for the cap, and then one tiny little bit down here where it says UV resistant matte. So I go in with Sharpie and label it matte, because otherwise I'm not going to know what it is. And I have a few other little things here and there that I use clean up. We got Q-tips for cleaning the airbrush tips. The most useful thing in the studio ever, which are baby wipes. Seriously, regular old paper towel. That is about it, except for when I get to more of the masking, I will explain how I use Silly Putty for masking. But yeah, the toy Silly Putty. What else do I want to add before I actually start going into the painting and I turn off the sound, because I'm going to put music on while I work, and I'll go in and put in a voiceover. Plus, you won't have to hear my air compressor. I will turn it on real quick right now so you can hear what it sounds like. But you can hear it. And what you're hearing is also just me pressing the air on the airbrush, because the compressor turns off when it doesn't need to build pressure. So yeah, air compressor does make a little bit of noise, not too much, it's fairly quiet. I bought that at Harbor Freight. It is not the best airbrush compressor in the world. You know, at some point I'll probably invest in a much nicer one, but for $70, this was a pretty good air compressor. So I think that's about all that I want to say right now. And let's get into the actual painting. Oh, yeah, there was one other thing. The reason I have the Paint Master here, and it's gonna go where I can see it easily, but it's out of any spray range, is because this is what I'm patterning everything else off of, matching all the patterns, all the colors, everything to the Paint Master, and that's really important when you're doing multiples like this. If you were just painting, you know, say if you get a Lady of Innsmouth yourself, or another resin kit or resin figure, you don't need to worry so much about, you know, matching exactly. You can freeform it. But because I'm trying to match everything, I do want to have the Paint Master that I can refer to that's right here where I can see it. Plus, this means this one is mine, so I actually have my very own painted Lady of Innsmouth that I get to keep forever. Which goes along with, I have one of the gray resin one, that's the master for making more molds of, and I have my own bronze one as well. Mode with the single action airbrush, and starting off with the shell pink. It's hard to see in the video, but there is a piece of cardboard that I'm spraying onto in the back there, and that's just to test the flow to make sure I've got the air pressure right in the air compressor. And that's important because that affects the flow, especially with the single action where you can't really control the air pressure and the flow as much. You can adjust the flow a little bit with the nozzle. It screws in and out, and the further in or out it's screwed, the wider the spray pattern is. Since right now I'm spraying a flat coat, it's at a fairly wide spray pattern setting. Not the widest it goes, because then it would be overspraying a lot, and I didn't really want to get the paint everywhere, because that makes a mess. And you can see that the shell pink is very subtle. It doesn't really, it looks like it doesn't show in this, until you see it, when they get lined back up, you'll see it compared to the others. You can see right there the difference in the pink, especially the way it's shining in the light, and that's the pearl and iridescent in it, causing the reflection. I mix up the colors very specifically to make sure I could build up as much luminosity as possible, because real skin is somewhat translucent, and with the resin being a solid opaque white, it really isn't going to have that translucency. So using the iridescent in it, getting some reflectivity through the various layers of paint, and is going to end up being on the skin at least I think it's 3 or 4 layers of paint building up. This flat one, next up you'll see, is the shadow color. Then I skipped actually recording the second pink coat, but there's a second pink coat before I start going in with the blue coat, which you'll see shortly. And this right here, we've switched over to the shading color, and where I'm shading is anywhere where a natural shadow would be, and that's just sort of pump it up to make it have more depth. So you see I'm shading in the cheekbones, under the chin, between all the tentacles. And it looks really stark right now because it's a very, very dark color. But again, I'll be going in with another translucent coat of the shell pink over this, which will help. You'll see I'm brushing off here and there. I was having issues with water splattering from my airbrush when I was doing this, and turned out I had a little kink in the hose, and when you have any sort of bend in the hose, what'll happen is, even though there's a moisture trap on my compressor, some moisture still goes through the airline, and it will collect if there's a kink in the hose, and then eventually the pressure will build up and it'll splatter through the airbrush, and you'll get a huge water splatter, which is, obviously no good. You don't want that. And that was what was happening right here, and it was just driving me crazy until I finally managed to find what was going on with it. I ended up moving my compressor around and taping the hose to the table, so it's, there's less places for it to curl around on the floor, which is what was causing the kinks. So you see, going on the second one, adding more shadows, making sure, especially the deep parts, like up near the top of the jawbone, under where the ears would be, and inside the siphons, which are in place for ears. Here and there I do cutout steps, because this really is a lot of building up layer after layer after layer for the skin to just give it the right effect. And sometimes I'm pulling the airbrush way back and turning the pressure down so it's much more of a splattery effect, which gives the skin more texture. If I was doing something more monster-like, like a vampire or a demon, or a really ripped barbarian type with a lot of muscles and veins showing on the muscles, I'd also be going in with really fine line airbrush and doing kind of little squiggles to mimic veins under the skin. And I didn't want to do this with Lady of Innsmouth, because while that would have looked, a little more, I guess, natural, at the same time, on such a delicate, feminine looking piece, it would end up looking a little too grotesque. And the last thing I wanted was for her to look, like a monster. She is a monster. She's one of the Innsmouth folk, but at the same time, I wanted her to be, very eerie and beautiful rather than, grotesque or frightening. So I skipped doing the veining and instead went with, splattering and lots of layers to build up a skin texture rather than trying to, go entirely realistic. and I really wish it would showed up better on the video or photos to see the iridescence. Maybe I'll try to capture that in the next, probably not the next video, probably the last video when I do the hand painting. I'll try to see if I can get it in good natural light to see if I can get the shimmer to show, the iridescence, because it really does make a huge difference. And I did it because I want to have a very aquatic, fish-like wet look. But it's just such a beautiful effect. I think anytime from now on, when I airbrush skin tones, I'm going to put at least a little bit of the pearl in at least the undertones, because it does get that luminosity that you don't get otherwise with opaque resin. And I'd also love to try that using it with a more translucent resin, which I can do. I have the Smoothcast 326 that I used for the cold cast bronze is a tintable, and I can tint it more of a flesh color and not use a whole lot of tint, so it's not fully opaque. And I'd love to try that at some point with a different project, possibly with the next project that I'm working on right now. I'm doing this fawn that is based on spring. I want to do two. I want to do spring, which is a female fawn, and fall, which will be, autumn themed. And I'm thinking of titling them Pan's Daughter and Pan's Son. And when those are finished, it might be interesting to try to do them with a more translucent look. But I don't know. I haven't decided exactly what I want to do with them once they're finished, aside from cast them. So, as you can see, we've moved on to blue, and this is just coloring the base color of the tentacles. And yes, I did do this over the pink, and that's because I want the pink to show through a little bit, and you'll see, I actually skipped over a lot of the finishing. But, you go in, I went in eventually and just highlighted along where the suction cups are on the tentacles with the pink. So there's a variation in the tones. And here I'm going in with the shading blue. And this is to be really subtle. Shading over the face, between the tentacles. Yeah, a lot of the places along the tentacles that I already shaded with the shading purple color. And I'm just going over again with the shading blue. And then again, after this, we'll be doing another blue layer over it, another pink layer over, and just building them up. I, didn't want to do all the steps because it would have taken forever. This video is all of one day of painting, and you only see 3 or 4 statues per segment, but I'm doing all 12. Ended up being a 13-hour day. And I've already recorded for the next day, where it was a 16-hour day. Most of that 16 hours was sitting there masking off the statues. The masking took forever with the silly putty and tape and the whole deal. What you don't see, and I should have recorded a little bit of this, is why I'm using silly putty for the masking. The reason that silly putty is used on areas that have already been painted, I use masking tape on the areas that haven't been painted if I don't need to shape it perfectly. You can use silly putty, kind of sculpt it so it'd be shaped to just the right shape. But on freshly painted resin with the airbrush, if you lay down the masking tape and then you go to pull the masking tape off, it'll pull the paint off. Now that's because there's still some moisture in it, hasn't fully dried, it hasn't been sealed. Once it's sealed and everything, it doesn't peel or scratch quite as much. It still can a little bit, but it, especially after a few coats of sealer, it's, pretty sturdy. But when it's in the, just barely dry stage, you put masking tape off, pull it off, it'll just rip all the paint off. And in here I'm going in and I'm doing the tentacle stripes, and this is just the first layer of stripes. I did the first layer, I went in, did another coat of the base blue, and then I went in and striped again. And that's just to give a variation in the depth of the stripes. Now, the blue colors, the stripe colors and the base color for the tentacles also has iridescent paint in it. It's got a little bit of iridescent blue and iridescent green Createx airbrush colors. And I think this is all for this video. Like, subscribe, comment if you have any questions, and take a look for the next video. Thank you. Bye-bye.